Local farmers are set for a bumper season, even if times are a bit tough at the moment. Household internet speed set to triple, and it might be for free. And Tesla's tumbling share price means Elon Musk is no longer the richest person in the world. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Wednesday, the 6th of March, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have a very topical interview. You're speaking with John O'Loughlin, Managing Director for the Asia-Pacific region at Coinbase.
Yes, so it's all about cryptocurrencies and particularly Bitcoin. Of course, Coinbase is a crypto exchange, the largest one in the US. We ask him about why there's such a surge in the Bitcoin price. Now, John's not a man to give us a forecast for future prices or anything like that, but he just explains what's going on in the market, what's going to happen with regulation. Coinbase are all for more regulation. That's what they're pushing for. And the vibe, dare I say, around cryptocurrencies at the moment. John is an expert in it, able to put it into English as well.
Yeah, it is a really good interview. It's coming up after the show, Sean. Well worth sticking around for. The main story, though, this morning, it should be good times for farmers, even if it's been a little bit rough recently. The Government Agricultural Authority is forecasting that Australia's farm, fisheries and forestry sectors will rebound next year after a disappointing 12 months.
The Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences, take a breath, otherwise known as ABARES, reckons output next year will increase 6% to $91 billion, which would be the third highest on record. Crops output is tipped to increase to $48.7 billion and livestock to top $36 billion. That would be a record. Livestock I'm talking about there, and reflects favourable climate conditions and improving prices. ABARES says the above average summer rainfall this year and the subsequent build-up of soil moisture reserves in eastern Australia will provide plenty of incentive for planting ahead of the next season. It predicts broadacre farm cash incomes will rise next financial year to about $192,000. Now, they will probably come in this year at about $131,000. So that $60,000 increase is pretty significant for farmers. Agriculture in Australia is primarily in southern Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, southeastern South Australia and southwestern Western Australia. Now, more than half of Australia's land use goes to agriculture. It's really important in terms of how we use the country. It takes about 3/4 of all water used across the continent, which I think is an amazing statistic. It's worth about 14% of all exports. But in terms of employment, it only provides about 2.2% of jobs in the country and the city for that matter. When I'm talking country, I'm talking Australia here. It's also, of course, has the added benefits of feeding us all. That's beneficial. And, of course, it's part of our national story.
Okay, there's a fair bit of good news in there, Sean, but we know there's always bad news as well, because you can't have good news in a report without some bad news to balance it out. What is it this time?
Well, there's a fair bit of bad news. For example, ABARES expects exports will continue to decline, and income this financial year has been pretty awful. I just mentioned that $131,000 ain't so good for farmers. Dry conditions and soft international grain prices have led to Australia's agricultural output declining by 15% in the 2023-2024 period. Wheat production will be down this financial year by 40%. Mind you, that comes after a bumper year, the one before, and this year will still be the third best on record. It's also been a rough year for sheep and cattle farmers, with prices lower due to higher supply. It's also very downbeat on the wine sector. That's ABARES, saying exports will continue to drop because of falling prices. Also, local consumption of wine is falling, so the wine growers in particular are going to be hit hard. However, you put all that into the mixmaster, as we like doing here at Fear and Greed. Generally, the outlook for the sector, for agriculture, agribusiness, farms, fisheries, forestry, etc., is actually much better for the next financial year.
Do you enjoy going through a report like this? Because they're really interesting, isn't it? Because there's such tangible things, what you're actually talking about. It's one of those industries and sectors where you understand what they're actually talking about.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the country, as I did, we were townies. We didn't live on a property. But the discussion was always about, fat land prices seemed to be the one that we always used to talk about. And so it's just part of the fabric of growing up for me. So I get very, very interested in these reports, I must say. Also, we had this debate about whether Woolies and Coles are charging too much for lamb. Well, this report says actually lamb prices for the farmers have gone down a lot. So you sort of push that through to what that means for consumers. It means we should be paying a lot less for lamb.
And it's funny, actually, Sean, and when you say that kind of growing up in the country, that was the same here as well. And we talk about the broadacre farm cash incomes, expected to be, 190 odd thousand, did you say?
Yep, thereabouts.
Up from 131,000. And there was always these references to whether it was a good year or a bad year, and you could actually see the good year reflected in kind of the money that was spent then.
Yeah.
You could see it reflected in the new car, for instance.
Yeah.
There was just more being spent on the farm, machinery, all that kind of thing, and that was really tied very closely to those good years.
So my father used to own or his brother and he used to own the Ford dealership in Orange many, many years ago. And our family income depended a lot on how the farmers did, because if the farmers did well, they'd come in and buy a new car, and that actually helped our family income. The other thing was at Mount Panorama, I think it was called the Hardy Ferrado back then. And if Ford won, because of course this was a Ford dealership, sales of Fords would go up. So the two big variables for the Aylmer family income, this is in the 70s, was how good are the crops and who's going to win Bathurst.
That is fantastic. All right, moving on now to local markets. How did things go yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down slightly to 7,724 points, with consumer stocks leading the way lower, while healthcare companies did best. The big miners, BHP, Fortescue Metals Group and Rio, rebounded from their falls on Monday. CSL was up 1.3%. It had also fallen on Monday. Telstra was flat. Otherwise, the rest of the top 25 stocks were lower, led by Wesfarmers and National Australia Bank. Not a good day for the lithium miners, which reversed some of the gains of the previous day. Pilbara Minerals, IGO, Sayona Mining and Liontown all ended lower. Bunch of companies traded ex-dividend. Coles, Endeavour Group, Iluka Resources, Lovisa, Origin Energy and Worley all went ex. In corporate news, probably the big story, Helios's chief executive resigned and will be replaced by Paul Anderson, formerly of Network 10, who will lead the company's strategic review. Now, this is a troubled pathology group. Its share price on the news that the CEO was leaving jumped 16% and was the best of the top 200. Probably not great when you're walking out the door and the share price takes off when you leave.
That's a slight blow to the ego, isn't it? That's interesting. Paul Anderson, we spoke to Paul on Fear and Greed. This was back in about 2021. And the reason we were talking to him is he'd just been appointed the CEO of Byron Studios, because this was in the middle of the pandemic. And there was all of this attention on the TV and the film industry in Australia because we, compared to other places around the world like the US, etc., we're still having a pretty kind of thriving production sector because we had such good kind of lockdown measures internationally. And he had started up, or he was appointed the CEO of this studio that was based up near Byron Bay. And they had set up kind of production facilities, hoping to really kind of piggyback off this surge in demand for our TV and film production.
I wonder what happened.
I don't know. We might have to do a follow-up, Sean.
Maybe.
Or I could just do a 4.5-minute summary of something we did 3 years ago.
Possibly.
Too late. What's happening in international markets?
Plenty. Particularly in gold markets, the price of the precious metal hit its highest level in 3 months on the back of renewed speculation that the US Federal Reserve will lower interest rates by June. Spot gold climbed to just above $2,120 an ounce, the highest since December 4. Investors, on the back of recent data, think there's a near 80% chance that there'll be a rate cut in the US in June. A week ago, that was just 50%. Now, non-yielding commodities like gold and silver, they tend to do better in a falling interest rate environment. Gold's also a safe haven asset, of course, so investing in the precious metal provides a hedge against a recession or significant downturn in the US, which is still a possibility. Then we can move on to crypto markets. Bitcoin is flying, worth around $67,000 a unit, or a record 105,000 Aussie dollars a unit. It's up 60% this year. Certainly one of the best performing asset classes around the place. Other cryptos are also rising in value. The introduction of Bitcoin exchange-traded funds has supercharged the currency since January, but also helping is that speculation around the place about lower US interest rates sooner rather than later. And on Wall Street, Nvidia keeps appreciating, and at a value of more than $2 trillion US dollars, it's moved ahead of Saudi Aramco as the world's third most valuable public company. But Apple's share price fell 3% after it was hit with a £1.8 billion penalty from the European Union over an investigation into allegations it shut out music streaming rivals, including Spotify. The European Commission also ordered Apple to stop preventing music streaming apps from informing users of cheaper deals outside of Apple's App Store.
All right, there is a bit going on. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, almost 15 million private health insurance customers will have to pay premiums 3% higher on average from April the 1st.
It's the largest annual increase in costs since 2019, but relatively low by historical standards and, of course, below the rate of inflation. Australia's 31 private health insurance providers are allowed to increase their premiums once a year, but they need approval from the Health Minister. About 14.7 million Australians, or 55% of the population, have hospital or extras cover, and they'll be affected. Now, those insured were paid more than $23.5 billion in health benefits last year. Media reports late last year said the insurers wanted to lift premiums by as much as 6%, but they were rejected by Mark Butler, the health minister. It came in, on average, at a little over 3%. Now, the actual amount depends on your insurer. Bupa customers, for example, self-interest here, Michael, I'm looking at a 3.6% increase. HBF's nearly 4%, Medibank's 3.3%, and NIB is 4.1%.
Now, Sean, self-interest is driving this next story for me. Faster internet speeds might be on the way. The NBN Co, which is, of course, the wholesaler of the National Fibre Optic Network, has asked internet providers if they can handle faster downloads. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, the customers can. Can the providers handle them? The NBN is proposing quicker connections for people on its highest speed plans, and the government corporation says it will not increase wholesale prices charged to retailers if it raises speeds. It suggested lifting plans of 100 megabits per second to about 500 megabits per second and plans of 250 megabits per second to about 750 megabits per second. NBN says it wants to meet unprecedented usage of high-definition streaming and remote work. It would apply to the 9 million broadband customers who have a fibre to the premises or hybrid fibre coaxial connection and wants to bring in the higher speeds over the next 12 months or so. Now, that's actually most of us who have those connections. The build-out of the NBN is now complete. It's now working on improving speeds, particularly since data demand and usage has doubled in the past 5 years, with the average household now consuming 443 gigabytes a month across 22 devices.
Yeah, Sean, internet speed is a slightly contentious issue here at Fear and Greed sometimes, isn't it? Because when we have our operations meetings with our Fear and Greed colleague, Adam Lang, and there's the three of us on a video call, and the video is lagging a little bit, which sometimes happens, and I very confidently say to the two of you, something is wrong with one of your internet. and I make everybody go and do a speed test.
And how many times have we done that speed test?
Look, we've done it a few times.
We've done it many times. And how many times has Adam had the problem?
Well, I mean,
how many
typically
times have I had the problem?
Well, typically you guys come in at like 110 megabits per second or 180 megabits per second for your download speeds. And then I'm like, oh, this isn't looking good. If you do it, I'm like, fine, I'll do it too. And I do mine. There I am with 18 megabits per second. And suddenly, really, it's not an issue that we need to pay attention to anymore. Let's move on with the meeting.
Let's.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Now, the ASEAN summit continues in Melbourne, and the federal government has announced that it will establish a $2 billion finance facility to help fund green energy and infrastructure investment in Southeast Asia. This is to really kind of tap into growing demand for renewable power in the region between now and 2050.
The initiative is a key recommendation of Australia's Special Envoy to Southeast Asia, Nicholas Moore, he of Macquarie Group fame, and it will provide loans, guarantees, equity and insurance to help bolster the two-way trade and investment with the ASEAN bloc. Also, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met with his Singaporean counterpart yesterday and struck a deal that will allow for cross-border electricity trade. There are also a group of Singaporean and Australian companies that will receive grants to support the green transition, and 10 of Australia's leading corporate executives will help facilitate trade and investment with the ASEAN bloc after agreeing to act as so-called business champions for individual nations. So, for example, Shamara Ramanayaka, the boss of Macquarie Group, will be the business champion for the Philippines. Other leaders, the CEOs of ANZ and Lendlease, they've put their names down as well. So good on them, and I hope that goes well. Not helping Mr. Albanese at ASEAN is former Prime Minister Paul Keating, who yesterday said ASIO boss Mike Burgess has displayed utter contempt for the so-called stabilisation process and should be sacked. This is after his comments last week. He said a foreign entity had set up an A-team trying to steal from Australia and had acquired the services in some manner of a member of Parliament. Keating thought that he should be sacked for telling us that. He was also critical of what he called the Albanese government's anti-China Australian strategic policy. Never short for a word, Paul Keating.
Always good for a headline too. Now, Sean, mining exports pushed the current account surplus higher to $11.8 billion, but economists are warning that today's growth figures might actually show an economy going backwards.
That's right. We are talking about the December quarter here. The Bureau of Statistics released final data points yesterday that go into that growth figure, including the current account surplus. Okay, Michael, I can see your eyes here. This might be for the economic boffins out there. I get that. But it does show some interesting stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Like So I did not mean that to sound skeptical at all.
It's your face actually giving it away, to be perfectly honest.
It was actually my interested noise. I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit kind of skeptical. Please go on. Mm-hmm.
So mining commodity exports drove the surplus. No surprise there. Goods exports were up 3.5%. Services exports were up a bit over 1%. Imports fell 2.6%. Why? Well, travel services fell nearly 8%, or imports of travel services fell nearly 8%, as Australians spent less time travelling overseas late last year. You might wonder why that's an import. That's because Australians going overseas are actually spending money overseas. So we're spending Aussie dollars overseas. It's an import. There were also a fall in the number of cars imported. So now we have all the pieces of the GDP story, Michael. It all comes together today in the December national accounts. Very exciting for the economists out there. Consensus view, little growth late last year, though there's possibility that we actually went backwards.
All right, we shall wait and see. And you know what, Sean? We'll have it all covered in the afternoon report this afternoon.
We will, of course.
Indeed.
We will.
Now, in international news, plenty of good news for presidential hopeful Donald Trump over the past 24 hours, with the likely Republican nominee winning both the Super Tuesday votes across 15 states and a major court victory.
Yeah. Overnight, 15 states, including two of the biggest, California and Texas, held primary races. And when all was said and done, Donald Trump, if he hadn't already, wrapped up the nomination to run for president for the Republicans later this year. I suppose that part was expected. The Supreme Court decision was probably also expected, but at least there was a little bit of doubt in that one. The US Supreme Court unanimously restored Donald Trump to the 2024 presidential primary ballots, rejecting state attempts to hold him accountable for the Capitol riot back in January 2021. The justices ruled the states can't invoke a post-Civil War constitutional provision to keep presidential candidates from appearing on ballots. It said that that particular power, resides with Congress. So it actually took away the power of states to do it. Trump responded by posting on his social media network, in all caps, of course, "Big win for America."
He loves all caps, doesn't he?
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Now, Beijing will target a growth rate of 5% for the world's second largest economy, slightly slower than 2023.
The target is all important because China tends to hit its goal, and so the 5% number, which was widely tipped, can be used to plan China strategies. It's higher than the IMS has forecast, so perhaps it means more stimulus in the economy from Beijing. One of the challenges for authorities is the housing crisis, which is culling demand for apartments and everything that goes into them. It also has a problem with unemployment, especially youth unemployment, and Beijing wants to create 12 million new urban jobs this year, which would result in an urban unemployment rate of around 5.5%. The figures come out of the National People's Congress that started yesterday.
And finally, Sean, it was only a matter of time, given the slump in Tesla's share price. But Elon Musk is no longer the world's richest person, handing that title to Amazon's Jeff Bezos.
Tesla's share price fell 7% yesterday, taking the decline this year to nearly 25%. The Magnificent 7 tech stocks are looking like the Magnificent 6 at the moment. The slide in the share price means that Musk's net wealth is now $197.7 billion US dollars, according to Bloomberg's Billionaires Index. Amazon's share price is up 18% this year, pushing Bezos's wealth to just over $200 billion US dollars. Bezos' first stint as the world's richest person began back in 2017 when he took over from Bill Gates of Microsoft fame. He lost the position in late 2021 on the back of Tesla's share price surge up until yesterday. Number 3, and close to knocking off Musk, is LVMH Moët Hennessy Louis Vuitton chair Bernard Arnault, who's worth $197.5 billion.
Okay, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. John O'Loughlin, Managing Director of Asia Pacific at Coinbase, is your guest today.
All you need to know about Bitcoin. And given it is running at the moment, it is well worth a listen, this interview.
Yeah, it certainly is. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And John, there's a new episode today of How Do They Afford That out, being Wednesday, of course.
What's it on?
Today's episode, it's actually quite a serious one because we get a lot of people writing to us for this podcast because it's about kind of making your money work harder for you. We do a lot about budgeting and we do a lot about investing and all this kind of thing. But we have a lot of people writing to us with requests for particular topics. And sometimes you get a really serious note. Like we received a message from a listener who asked us if we could do one on problem gambling. And basically, she was talking to us about how do you prevent someone with a gambling problem in your family from basically damaging your own finances? Kind of how do you quarantine the damage? And so it's a really kind of serious topic and one that is actually probably more prevalent than you'd like to think.
Yeah.
And so we kind of dive into that one today and how do they afford that? And I'll put a link in today's show notes.
Very challenging. I look forward to listening to it.
All right, thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 6th of March, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.